Alright, so today's going to be part one, basically initial setup for my new modding guide. Having two new guides. One is going to cover everything from graphics, sound, and gameplay. So basically, it's going to be a much bigger guide. And then I'm going to do another part two, which is going to be an updated version of my absolute beginner's guide. So I wanted to do a initial setup video that's going to encompass both of them, and it's going to go through some basic in-game settings, I settings, and a couple mods that are going to be the same between both guides. So I'll go through them here instead of doing it again at the beginning of each guide. Um, so first things first is before even getting Mod Organizer 2 or anything, you want to start the game just through Steam, and you want to go in to the settings in the menu, and then it's going to say VR performance, I believe. And in that one, you should get a window that looks like this one. So the main ones I wanted to talk about were super sampling. For this, I would put this all the way at the bottom. You want to use the super sampling from whatever headset you're using. So for Oculus, I use the Oculus Tray tool. For um, Windows MR, it has a setting in its own tool, but you can use the Steam VR one. If you're using a Vive, use the Steam VR one. The Index, use the Steam VR one. I would just recommend using that super sampling slider and not the one in game. Oh, quality preset. For most people, high is fine. If you have a lower end system, you can go down, but let's see. So the next big one is dynamic resolution. Everyone should have this off no matter what. The idea was that it's supposed to dynamically change your resolution in game to keep a frame rate, a specific frame rate. The problem with that is it doesn't usually work. Usually goes to a lower frame rate and just kind of locks it there. So everything gets crazy blurry and just looks terrible. So nobody should be using dynamic resolution. So make sure that is off. Next one is shadow quality. Um, that one doesn't matter too much. I don't know. To me in VR, I don't really notice shadow quality as much as I do on the monitor. I usually have this high anyway, though. Same thing with the quality preset on lower end systems. You can bring this down, and the same with the distance. I keep it on max because I don't like the pop-ins for the shadows. Rain occlusion, keep on. That'll keep the rain from going through solid surfaces. So the next big one is temporal AA. So the main, uh, it's a form of anti-aliasing. So when you're playing the game and you're moving, if you look around like at the tree branches or sides of buildings, if it kind of crawls and shimmers a lot, that is the main thing that temporal AA will kind of clear up. But how it does it is it adds kind of a blur effect. So it's kind of a trade-off. You can either have a more blurry picture but less of that shimmering aliasing, or you can have a sharper picture but a lot of aliasing. So for me, I'm really sensitive to aliasing, so I have to play with this on. Um, some people just can't deal with the blur, so you would turn that off if you would rather have a sharper picture and the aliasing doesn't bother you. But for me, that setting I just can't do it. So you can play with that in game. When you toggle it on or off, just kind of move around a little bit and look around and see which one you like more. Foliage shadows, it's kind of up to you. Unfortunately, you do have to restart the game to notice that one. That's what the little asterisk there is. I personally play with it off, but some people can't play without it, I guess. I don't know. Um, So I don't have a picture of lower down here, but there's two checkboxes that say LODs on them. I think it's LOD tree. Well, it'll say no LOD. Both of those, uncheck those. I think they're checked by default. That affects the distant objects, so make sure those are unchecked. Um, Aside from that, everything else we're gonna change in with the INI config tool. So you can exit out of this menu. You should see a little thing that says save or saving automatically, and then you can just quit out of here. So once you're out of the game, go to Nexus. I personally would recommend getting premium for a month, just for the initial setup. Makes the downloads go a lot quicker, especially if you're going to do the bigger guide, because there's a lot of big downloads. Even the smaller ones, some of them are like over a gigabyte. So I think it's worth it. It's just up to you. I mean, you could just queue all the downloads and let them go overnight, if you don't really care. Um, but it's only like $2 or something like that to get the premium. Anyway, so you go here to Mod Organizer 2. This is the only organizer that I support. Vortex is just going to cause issues with my guides, so um, I I can't really help you too much if you want to use Vortex on my guides because they're set up to be used with Mod Organizer 2. So you go down here to the installer, manually download it. It's gonna start downloading. Got it in here. Okay, so you double click, run. Okay, so where the program resides doesn't matter too much, because this isn't going to be where you can change the folder where your mods and downloads go, which I'll show you in a second. So this is just the program and where your profile um, stuff is going to be, but the only issue I've seen is if you put it in your program files folders. For some reason it doesn't like that. But it can go on any drive. I just have it on the C drive. I just kept it in this default modding MO2 folder. Um, yeah, keep all this recommended. Next, 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 and then install. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to install it again. So when you first start it, actually it's going to load into my profile. So when you first start it, you're going to want to create a new instance, name it whatever you want, hit OK, um, whatever. It's going to say that, click OK. So then you got to link it to the game. So you want to do SkyrimVR. If it doesn't show up here, hit browse and then browse to your SkyrimVR install. And then you'll click it. And then it's going to ask about a first time tutorial. I'd say no. So you get Mod Organizer 2. Now the first thing is I hate this super white look to this. So if you click on the settings icon right here, go to style. I prefer dark. You can go through, there's a whole bunch of them. This is my favorite one. So pick whatever color scheme that you prefer. I just can't deal with the super bright white. So once you have that, go back into settings here and go to paths. So this is going to be where you set up your downloads and your mods folders. Now your downloads and mods folders can go wherever you want. So just keep in mind downloads, you can get rid of downloads once they're downloaded. You don't have to keep the downloaded mods. The main reason you need to keep them if it's something you reinstall a lot, maybe you change settings on it or whatever, you can keep the mod so it's easy to reinstall it. You don't have to re-download it from Nexus each time. But if you don't care about that, you can just download or you can just delete the downloads after you've installed them, so they don't take up space on your hard drive. But you can put that in any folder, any directory you want to change it to. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. And the same thing for mods, but keep in mind this is where your actual mod folder is going to be located. So you got to make sure you're going to have the space. So make sure it's somewhere that you're going to actually have space for it. So some of the lists, like my biggest list I had somewhere upwards of like 200 gigabytes worth of mods. So just keep that in mind. My bigger list is going to be about 37 to 40 gigabytes. My smaller list is going to be, I don't know, not even a quarter of that. But just make sure you have the room wherever you put this. So just pick whatever folder. And those are the only two you really got to worry about. Everything else you can keep the same. The next thing you want to do is click on default here and then go to manage. You want to untick this box right here and hit yes. What this is going to do is it's going to let the game pick the INI files from the default path. Mod Organizer has a profile system where you can have like 10, well, as many profiles as you want, and each one can have its own INI setup and all that. This makes it so it actually uses the default path. I just find it easier if you're not doing multiple profiles to just let it be in the default path. The default path is going to be your My Documents, My Games, SkyrimVR right here. That's your default path for your INIs. So that's just telling Mod Organizer use these. Now editing them is going to be our next step. Now for that you're going to want to get the configuration tool. So come on to Nexus, do SkyrimVR configuration tool, just search for it up here, come to files, and you'll download it. Now if this doesn't download here, you probably didn't set up your Nexus profile. So you got to come into settings here and Nexus, and right here it'll have a little option. You can link it to your Nexus account. And you also want to pick your servers. So pick something that's closer to wherever you live. Kind of make a list of, and these are the servers it'll download from. And also click this associate with download manager links. Click that, and that'll make sure that it associates it. When you click on that, it links it to Mod Organizer too. If it doesn't work for some reason, you can revoke your authorization and then redo it, and that should link them together. So once you have it, it'll have them like that. Now this one, I actually didn't mean to download here. This one you got to manually download. So manually download it. And then this is just an exe file. So go back here. I've already downloaded this a couple times for testing things. Okay, so you're going to extract it, and it's just going to be this exe file. But for it to work properly with Mod Organizer 2, usually you want to, any external program for the most part with Mod Organizer 2, you want to load from within Mod Organizer 2. So where this goes, it doesn't matter too much. I have it sitting in a folder right here in my SkyrimVR install folder. So you want to go into Mod Organizer 2, click on the gear icon, and then you want to add it here. So you can put INI tool or whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. Click on the binary here, and then find that exe, and that's going to be your setup there. And then start in, go to the folder again and select folder, and then hit add. So now that you got that done, you can go to INI tool and hit run. Okay, so now the main thing you want to do is check that this path is right. So it should default to it, but just double check, make sure it's going to your My Games SkyrimVR directory here. Alright, so the settings I want to talk about are, first one is Fmax time. So this is going to be your physics setting. Um, this one is going to depend on your frame rate, but basically what'll happen is if this is off, you'll get some weird physics stuff where objects will just randomly fly around rooms. Like you'll be walking into one of the inns and like you bump into something and a chair goes flying everywhere. The default actually isn't usually ideal. Um, 111 is basically 90. Um, so I that one's usually good for me. If you're having issues where you change it to this 0111 value, change it back to the default and try. But the 111's usually good. So next one up is F near distance. So this value has a couple uses, but basically it helps with the flickering in the distant mountains called Z fighting. So if you ever looked in the distance and you saw a weird kind of flicker way off in the mountains, upping this value helps that. The downside is it also makes things in your peripheral disappear um, at a further away distance. So if you're leaning into something or you bring something toward your face, it'll completely disappear farther away the higher the value is. The lower the value is, you can bring stuff like right up to your face before it disappears. I found 9 is pretty good for me. A lot of the guides around the internet, you'll see 11 or 13, but I find stuff disappears way too early. Um, so I don't like doing it too high. You could play around with it. 11's good for some people. 9 was fine for me. So the next one we're going to talk about is the F dialog menu rotate Z. Also, with any of these values, if you're trying to find them, just start typing them in the filter and it'll automatically find them for you. So this F dialog menu rotate Z, basically this rotates the dialog menu when you're talking to an NPC. For me, that's always like kind of right in their face and in the way. So this rotates it to the right a little bit. It kind of angles it. So if you don't like the angle that much, you can lower this a little bit, but you want to kind of move it out of the way a little bit so it's not like right over their face. This is just kind of my preference, but also if you want the dialog menu as a whole smaller or bigger, adjust this scale right here. I like it a little smaller. The next one is the F activate rollover scale. So that's going to be when you roll over an item, like you put your motion controller over something and it gets that pop up. To me, the default's way too big, so you can scale that down. I'm using 10 on these. So just find what's good for you. Try 10. If that's too small for you, you can make it bigger. The next one is F activate pick length. So that's going to be the distance when you point at something, how far away you have to be for you to get that notification that you can interact with it. For NPCs, items, any of that. The default's really far away. So you can kind of, if you are looting a body, you can kind of just stand and point at the body and it'll activate. If you bring it down to about 35, you have to actually bend down and touch the body to get that activation. To me, that's more immersive. I like it. Some people might not want to bend over all the time to do that. The other issue is when you're in uh, like a like in a shop and you're trying to interact with the shopkeeper. Sometimes you have to like reach way over to get that activation to pop up. But I don't know. I like it. I like it closer. I like having to like bend down and loot bodies. But you can kind of adjust this to your liking. I mean, you could even raise it if you want to just have a crazy distance to interact with stuff. Next one is going to be iMin grass size. So this affects your grass draw. This is grass is one of the biggest frame rate killers in the game, so it's a pretty important one for your frame rate. With this, the lower the value actually is, the more grass is drawn. So the higher you bring this, the less grass overall is drawn. So for the guides, I have it at 40 for the one I'm using in the guides. But this is one to remember if you're having frame rate issues, to bring this up higher. All right, so next one is going to be do depth of field. I don't personally think depth of field works right in VR, so it's just kind of wasted performance. So I personally disable that. Let's see what else. A lot of these are my personal ones for like getting rid of UI elements, so I'm not going to go over all that. Um, comfort sneak and realistic. Actually, use realistic bow aiming. So when you're back in the main settings for the game, um, under the VR settings, there's also realistic sneaking, bow aiming, and swimming. So swimming I don't really care for. You kind of move. It doesn't really feel like swimming, but you can turn that on if you want. But I would use the sneaking and bow aiming, or at least the bow aiming. The sneaking basically means you have to physically crouch to activate sneaking. Um, Obviously, it depends how you play. If you're like me that always plays room scale, moving around, you want to be more immersive. But the bow aiming's pretty. Um, you need that for the bow to line up right and feel right when you're doing archery. But all these settings you can also do here. So that's basically one is like it's checked and zero is going to be off. So you can also just change it here if you want. The next one's going to be IMAX desired. So this is kind of your particle draw. By default, I find it's a little low. Um, if there's a lot of particle effects going on in the game and the game can't draw enough, sometimes like your magic will disappear and it doesn't display it. I go to 1500. You'll see some suggestions on the internet to say 3000, even some 6000. It doesn't seem to have a big impact on frame rate, so I found 1500's pretty good. Um, okay, next one is F-tree load distance. Now this one's going to affect how far it'll load trees. The default is crazy low. I would suggest at least 75,000 here. The default's only 12,500. I have mine at 125,000. That might be a little much for VR, but I'd say 75 to 100,000 is a good value. You could do 125 too, but at least 75,000 is where I'd put it. The next one is UI max skinned trees to render. So the trees kind of have two states a lot of the times, where it's you have like your full branches loaded, and then they have like a half state where only part of the branches load. Um, if it's kind of annoying because you're walking through the forest and like branches just kind of pop in on trees. So you want to set this higher so that doesn't really happen. Um, you'll look around, most suggestions say about 200. You could lower this a little bit, but it shouldn't affect performance too much. I use 200. You could try 100 if you're on a lower end system. All right, next one is the LOD fade outs. So these actually can be somewhat performance heavy. This basically affects how far away the game will load things, um, objects, items, and actors. So like for the actors, if you have this super low, um, it won't draw the NPCs very far, so they'll just kind of pop in on you. Um, the problem is if you put this up too high, it really kills your performance. So I kind of just doubled the values on a lot of these. Well, almost doubled it. I found 10 was pretty good. I was testing in some areas where I could see an NPC at a certain distance, and I felt that was a pretty good distance for it to draw in, so I stuck with the 10 there. If you're on a lower end system, you probably just want to keep it on the defaults. But if you have a decent gaming system, you could try doubling them and then see how that works out for you. That's really it for the basic INIs. I have a bunch of other ones just to disable various UI elements because I don't play with any UI, but I have a whole nother guide on no UI setup, so I'll link that. But yeah, so that's it for that part. The last part of this initial setup that I want to do is just a couple mods that are going to be universal to all the guides. Or for both part twos. So the first thing is going to be your script extender. So the Skyrim script extender is basically required for a lot of stuff to work. So it's vitally important that you get this. So you're going to come here to the script extender website and you're going to get the VR build. So just download that here. Let's see, I got it here. Okay, so it's going to go here. You'll just extract it. And then for this, what you need to do is just copy this whole thing to your SkyrimVR root directory. So you just copy this here. And I already have this all here, so I'll skip it. And then once it's here, to use script extender, you always have to load the game through the new exe, which is this loader. But for that to work with Mod Organizer 2, you have to add it in here. So go to your gear icon again. You'll go to SKSE. Actually, that probably won't even be in there. If it's not, just label it SKSE, go to the binary, and then go to your root install, click on the loader, and then same thing for start in, just pick your root folder and then hit add. So now anytime you run the game, you have to run it from within Mod Organizer 2, hitting the run button with SKSE. If you don't, it's not going to install the script extender, and then anything that relies on that's not going to work. So the first mod that we're going to get for that is SkyUI. Alright, so SkyUI you get from GitHub. The one on Nexus will not work. So make sure you're going to GitHub and getting the SkyUI from here. So just click on this guy right here. And any mod that's external to Nexus that you have to manually install, you click on this right here. It's install from archive. And so you'll go to wherever you downloaded SkyUI and click on that and click OK. And activate it. And that's it for that one. So then there's a couple VR specific mods I wanted to go over. First one is going to be the haptic feedback mod. So this is going to it's going to add haptics to spellcasting because it's not there by default, and it gives you better bow and melee haptic feedback. So first thing is go to Files and download it. Okay. So once you have it installed, activate it. Now you have to go back to the description, go to requirements, and you need the SkyrimVR Tools DLL. So it's going to bring you here. Just click on this assets right here and download this DLL. If you are using Chrome, it'd probably give you a warning here. Just hit keep. I already have it installed. So you download it. Now come back to your mod organizer, right click on the haptic mod, click open and explore. Now you're going to go to the SKSE folder, your plugins folder, and you're going to copy that exe that you just downloaded to this folder. So where do I have it? Right here, SkyrimVR tools, and you just copy it here. Now, the haptic has a config text file where you can config all the parameters for this mod. So if you open it up here, the main things you'd kind of want to worry about is if the haptic is too strong, because depending on which headset or which controllers you have, depending on which headset you have, how strong the haptics are varies a bit. So you can kind of read these to see what they each do, but say you're going and Magic's like way too strong for you, you can bring this down to like 0.5. Same thing with any of these other ones, and just kind of mess with the strength on them and see if that helps you out. But you can also adjust various things if it just feels off. It kind of describes what they do in the description here. But for me, mainly the strength is the one you kind of want to find a good strength for whatever headset you have. Then you just save it, and then that one's installed. The next one is a somewhat new one. It's locational damage. So what this does is actually gives you locational damage for where you hit things. So it's for projectiles, so it'll work for magic or arrows. He mainly designed it for archery, but it basically increases damage for headshots or body shots, etc. So you can actually customize the damage too, which I'll show you real quickly here. So just go ahead and it's normal download, locational damage, and you activate it. Then you right click, open, go to the SKSE, plugins, and this one also has an INI, so go ahead and open that. So on this one, the main things to look for is player to NPC. So right now the head damage is set to 8 times multiplier. To me that's a bit high. It depends a lot on your difficulty and if you have combat mods that add more hit points to enemies and stuff, but for vanilla 4 times is about good, and you can change the chest damage too. I find 1.5 a bit high. 1.2 is pretty good. But you can adjust that at any time too, mid-game, whenever you want. So if you find you're doing way too much damage, you can come in and change these values. The other thing I would change is the display notification. So anytime you get a headshot or anything that affects the locational damage, you'll get a little notification with a damage value. I personally find that crazy annoying, so go ahead and change that to false. And that's really it. I adjust in here. You can change some of these other ones. You can change like how much armor reduces damage and stuff, but mainly just the notification and messing with the actual damage. So go ahead and save. And the last one is going to be true sound. So there's 2 different true sounds. There's one on GitHub, which is a bit newer, and then there's one here. So I had issues with the one on GitHub, even using the VR patch that's on there. I went back to this one, and all the issues that I was having went away, so I'm just sticking with this one. This one's also a manual download, so just hit manual download. And true sound. So extract it, and for this one all you have to do is copy it to the root folder of your Skyrim install. So go to wherever your Skyrim's installed and just drag it to the folder. and that's it. Tree sounds installed. Um, yeah, so that's all I wanted to talk about for this initial setup. So the next two videos, I should be able to get the long one out tomorrow. And that's going to be about 140 mods, and it's going to cover everything, graphics, sound, gameplay. It's like a complete overhaul. Um, the other one, I'm just redoing my absolute beginners video because I have some updated mods that I like to use over the ones on my old video. But I just wanted to do this because this affects both videos, so this gives just so I didn't have to make the other ones too long. So hopefully that was helpful, and I will get the other videos up as soon as possible. Have a good one.